Welcome. It's lovely to see you. Really, really lovely to see you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining me tonight. We are talking about relationships and we are talking about what we put in the space between relationships. And we're talking about how can we be the best in all of our relating, in our family with our family members, with our colleagues, with our friends, with our lovers, with our husbands and wives, our partners. What is it that we're doing that makes a difference? Because there's lots and lots out there that is written and talked about looking for the one, or what friends should be like, or what family members should behave like, or what a boss should, or an employee. All of these things, which of course have their validity. We're always in relationship. We're living our life in the mirror of relationship and in the interactions and in the dynamic of relationship. And of course, it's the thing that informs all of our lives to such a degree that generally when you hear people talking, if you go past them and they're talking together on a walk, or they're talking in a coffee shop, or they're anywhere you might find people talking, they're generally talking about other people. Often they're talking about, what somebody should have done, could have done, shouldn't have done, didn't do. And so it's very prevalent that people are looking at the other and what the other should do differently. Now, as I said, that's not invalid. When we're in relationship, we might well be in a situation where we are requesting behavior change, or we're requesting a certain way of somebody who's going to be employed by us, or we're going on an adventure together and we want to know what the dynamic's going to be. So it's not that we wouldn't be in communication with another about what we were hoping, and what the overtly what we are expecting. Now, having said all that, I now will say that ultimately it's all to do with us, and the most important relationship is the one we have with ourselves, and the one that is in all of the relationships. So there is always a common denominator. There is always us, whether it's in relationship with our friend, with our mother, with our father, with our child, with our lover, with our boss, whether our employee, all of these places that I have already mentioned. It's us. We're the ones who are putting the things in the space. And if we're working on ourselves, if we're aware of any patterns that might come up, so we might look in our relationships and we might find that we are disappointed. We might be disappointed in lots of areas. We might be disappointed in a friend or many friends, in our partner, in the colleagues at work. And if we look where there are perhaps common themes and bring it back to us, then we can think, what is it that is going on for us? Because whether we like it or not, we're the ones that can make the difference. Ultimately, we can completely make the difference by doing all the work ourselves. If there's a couple or two people and one person does the work, transformation can happen. And in my work with many people over the last many years, 40 years or so, I have worked with people who have been the only person working on the dynamic, whether that's in a relationship with their partner, or people at their workplace, and they've done the work and transformation has happened. There have been patterns which, being able to investigate that, for instance, sometimes people will find that in a workplace there's always one person who they have a difficulty with. And I can remember this with people I've worked with. They'd go into a situation and there'd be the one person, and this whole thing would carry on and it would be very difficult. They might leave the organisation, because of course we don't have to stay in situations. We can remove ourselves. However, if the pattern isn't shifted within us, it usually rears its head again. So I've worked with people who, in the end, they can't bear the situation. They leave the establishment, they go and work somewhere else. The same thing happens, the exact same thing. And the cycle goes round again until the person's willing to think, what am I putting in the space? Now, it doesn't mean that the other isn't part of that dynamic. Of course it doesn't. People are behaving in all sorts of ways. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to have a conversation and work out how we can change our communication, although I'll come on to that in another live that I do. But if we're just looking at us, we can look at this. If there's a pattern, what can we do? And as I say, I can think of situations where people have perhaps gone into 3 different situations, 3 different jobs, and the same thing has happened until they have shifted something in their inner landscape, seen the pattern, maybe seen the pattern that played out at school, maybe it played out first with their siblings. And when they've really, really taken responsibility for what they're putting in the space, and they've changed their part, transformation happens. And magically, there's suddenly not that person there anymore. And either the person changes or the person leaves, or something seemingly magic happens. So of course, what's happened is the person, my client, has been worked on their own pattern, and very importantly, worked on their reactivity, because essentially at the core of it all, if we're able to recognize that if we react to a difficult situation, so we get upset by somebody else and we are upset, however we get upset, whether we feel angry, sad, not good enough, disappointed, all those many emotions that can be triggered in us, if we're absolutely aware that the moment that's happened, we aren't present. The moment that's happened, what we're going to be putting in the space between the other will not be to do with the situation we're in. Maybe a bit of it, but it can be 90% of it can be just coming from a past experience, and immediately everything's off kilter. And whether the other person, as I say, I'm not saying the other person isn't doing something, that other people are doing things, but immediately everything is out of balance and we're not present and everything goes wrong. And generally everything keeps repeating. And usually those cycles will keep repeating, as I say, whether that's in a work situation. I can think of many other people I've worked with where it's happened in work situations. But of course it happens with couples, with a close intimacy, where relationship is a mirror. Of course, intimacy, it doesn't just have to be our partners, our lovers, our husbands, wives, but any intimacy, that can be a huge magnifying glass, and it can be more that what we put in the space can become off balance. Because, as I said, the moment we're triggered and the moment we have a loss of stillness, and the space inside us that is usually, well, hopefully usually calm, we can work with that other time, but is easeful. The moment that's out, then whatever we're putting in the space, we will be contributing to not bringing harmony into the space. We won't be healing it. We're more likely to be hurting it. And as I said in this talk tonight, I'm really exploring how we can be the best friend we can be, the best partner we can be, the best colleague, the best daughter, the best son, the best father, the best mother. And we do that by being aware 24/7 of what we're putting into the space. And that means that in every moment, it's being mindful of our tone of voice, our presence. Are we absolutely present with another? Now, the way we can be present with another is, of course, to be completely present with ourselves. So this brings us back to being aware of our energy and how we are feeling, and bringing our mind to more stillness. And really and truly, that's where bringing ourselves back with the breath. And in the olden days, they used to say, if you felt angry, count to 10 and take that, take a deep breath. And actually, that's true. If we can keep bringing ourselves back to presence, back to the present moment with the breath, and if we practice doing that, we practice what it feels like to be centered and at ease, then everywhere we go, what we're putting in the space is going to be of high energy, high vibe, contributing to the whole. Because ultimately, We have the space between us, just between two people. We have the space now between me and you. We have the space when we're sitting on a bus, when we're driving in our car with other cars, if we're in the theatre, if we're in a restaurant. There's the space between us. We're making a difference to it. And then, of course, there's the space in the whole world. Our vibration will make a difference to the space. We will make a difference to the space between us and the other when we're walking down the street. It may not be that it's that evident, but I think probably all of you will recognize that we can feel the vibe of another. We can feel it if we're sitting on a train, sitting next to somebody, sitting opposite somebody. We're giving off an energy all the time. And so therefore being aware all the time of keeping ourselves present means that, and also keeping ourselves aware of what we're saying and thinking, which we were talking about last week, then we're going to be more prepared to, when we get into a conversation, and that can be, with the bus driver, with our friends, people at work, we're going to be aware of not being part of making the space between us in any way unsafe. So, of course, we've all probably experienced being perhaps getting on a bus and the bus driver not being, I've got very keen on buses, by the way, clearly, because I live in London now, but the bus driver may not be having the greatest day and may not be particularly friendly. But if we're still and we're not, trying to do anything, not trying to make anything happen, not projecting what might be going on for him, but we're just aware of what we put in to that space, then of course that's all that matters, and that's what makes the difference. And now the same thing therefore is true if we are in close relationships, and if there are two people who are aware of this kind of work, then miracles can happen, and that would be described as conscious relating, where each person is 100% responsible for their reactivity, 100% responsible for their words, for what they put in the space. It means that the space remains safe at all times. It means that if we all know that the other is going to work on their reactivity, it means we can say absolutely anything. Of course, how we say things is integral to what we say. So it doesn't mean that we always are going to say things that the other necessarily wants to hear. Sometimes we might be saying we want to change how something's working, whether that's at work, or we might be planning a trip with somebody to go traveling, and then we might find we don't really want to do it. Or we might be in a relationship and we want to do something that perhaps we think our partner won't want us to do, or we just want to explore something, and we might want to move, they might not want to. There's all manner of things. And essentially, if every single one of us was aware that if we're mindful to keep the space safe, then absolutely anything can be discussed and anything can happen, and it can be okay. So it can actually be, there can be processes, but it can be okay if somebody wants to say, I don't want to have a relationship with you anymore, or I don't want you in my life, in the same way as if we might say to somebody, we want to change things. And so it isn't about it just being the times where it's easy to be aware of what we put in the space. It's the times where someone might have put something in the space that's difficult for us, and they may not be aware. So I've just talked about maybe we're doing a conscious relationship where two people have committed to be responsible for their own process, be responsible for their own reactivity, and it becomes safer and safer. But there are times where we're in lots and lots of relationships, I'm sure, where the other isn't conscious, isn't aware, doesn't want to be aware, thinks that it's totally justified to react, to project, to have all manner of things, to gossip, to talk about others. And therefore, it's still about what we're putting in that space between us and the other, when what they're putting in the space might not be very clean, it might not be very healing, it might not be growthful. It doesn't mean that gives us license to go, well, they were being like that, They were saying that. And in this case, it was their fault, or it was, it was okay because they were being whatever. There's never a they. There's never a they. There's never another in this situation. It's always back to us. And it comes back to us. So if we lose our center, we're the ones that need to re-find it. If we've lost our center and reacted, because it can happen, of course, but we're still the ones that need to recognize that in that reactivity, in that sharp tone, in that energy, the stuff that comes up and is suddenly put into the space, we are the ones that need to go, press pause and go, I'm sorry. And it's never too late to say sorry. It's always important to say sorry if we have reacted, because reactivity hurts others. Reactivity hurts the space between us. Now, at the deepest spiritual level, actually nothing can hurt us, and nothing can, ideally nobody can make us feel anything. However, people aren't as evolved as that, and therefore they do get hurt. And therefore, if you're doing this work, there's a double responsibility, really, because there's a responsibility of your own process and your own clearing, as I call it, so that you're non-reactive. But there's also an awareness of that the other is kind of invested in their created self, in the ideas they have, the opinions. They often believe they are those things, and therefore we can hurt them if we are reactive, or we use a different tone. And now, as I've said before, I say this often, what we don't want to do is, if we do make a mistake, because we are on a human journey, we can be really, really full of intention to stay present, to stay with the breath, to keep still, to be aware of everything we're putting in this space between the other, being aware of what comes up, being aware to clear it, press pause. And then we can slip up, and it can be too much, because some of the wounds are very deep and we don't know when they're going to be hit. And now, the more practice we have at thinking of that space, the more we're likely to be able to press that pause button again and not act out of the reaction and breathe. But if it happens that the reaction has happened, it's really important not to then beat yourself up in any way, because again, all you're doing is hurting yourself and hurting the space even more. It's just to recognize it, come back to the center point again, and apologize to the other, and keep going forward. Now, of course, there's not always another evident. We might be reading something, or we might be watching something and reacting to the news, to what we've read, to what we think another person's doing or isn't doing. Social media, of course, that I think triggers a lot of people. People feel whatever they feel. I think social media, like anything, is a wonderful place for us to connect. Look, I'm on it. It's a wonderful place for us to connect and share. But of course, like all of these things, it's as complex as every human is complex. And it's also a place where let's be really mindful of what we put in the space and what happens with what we're seeing. Being very aware not to judge, being very aware. Observation is fun. Observation as humans, we like watching, and it's one of the reasons we enjoy all this. But not judging, not gossiping, not making things up. I think we're in a world where people make things up about other people and they have no idea. If you've got a hypothesis, always prefix it with "I make up," but also be again aware that your words are being into that space, or going into that space, that your thoughts are going into that space, that all of these things are making a difference. And that really and truly, if we, instead of looking out there for the one, or looking for that person to be a certain way, looking for our parents to do something they never did when we were little, or wishing our children had turned out differently, or all the things that create such suffering for humans. It really does. All the wishing something was as it isn't, or wishing something hadn't happened, or wishing something would happen, all those things, or wishing a person was different to how they are, is so much pain for people. When we meet people as they are and love them, you know, that universal love, the more we connect to our essence, the more we come to our center point and know ourselves at the core of our being and feel that essence of ourselves, that is oneness, then of course we can absolutely love everybody. Now, when I say love everybody, that is that universal love. That doesn't mean, again, in relationship, that we have to put up with bad behavior, that we could stay in a relationship we don't want to, that we stay in a job we don't want to. We can move, we can change, but we can do it with keeping the space between us properly safe. And that way, we will honour our own truth too, because if we are aware that, you know, suffering is unnecessary with in relationship, people often are suffering because they're complaining about another, and that's everywhere. I've seen it. Obviously, I've listened to a lot of complaints as well from in my work over the years, but that often can be part of a process for somebody, of course, to go towards aligning. But there's no need for that suffering. The surrendering of our tension and our projections and our pain and our wounding and the stuff that's coming out of our past, that comes through clearing the reactivity. And then when we're still and we don't have that suffering going on, of course we can decide to leave. That doesn't mean we stay in a situation that isn't right for us. And that again comes back to the patterns. People often are caught in patterns, which is an inner landscape playing out on the outer realms. But just be mindful of thinking in terms of, how can I be the best I can be in every single relationship in my life? Every single one. Family, friends, lovers, partners, colleagues, the world, everybody you meet. What can I do to make that space safe and that space harmonious and that space growthful? So thank you. And I hope you have an amazing evening.